number one, and without hurting ourselves as a company, number two. That's why you see the panoply of panelists that we have here to guide us through that journey. So with that in mind, I will ask I'll go through each of our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and what they do. And then we just have a lot of questions to ask, and we'll invite questions to come in from the audience. Arlen Myers will be monitoring the chat box, and will interject your questions along the way to make this an engaging and lively session.
Yeah,
so,
if I can interrupt, the chat, it's best for the audience to put their questions in the Q&A, not the chat.
Good. Very good. Okay, so Christine, let's start with you.
Yes, I'm Christine Haas. I'm a former news anchor and investigative journalist. I started my own PR company about 8 years ago and have focused on all different sectors. It could be entrepreneurs, early stage companies, and certainly most recently got involved with a lot of life science companies and understanding the needs that a lot of people need from the start of building a new brand. But in addition to that, what it takes for a good Google test, or in the future, a ChatGPT test for the companies that are having money raised for them. And I have worked with various investment companies, one of them, Sal, who was kind enough to have me on this event today as well. We worked on different ways to help provide assets for him and his team and other teams, of course, that are fundraising for early stage companies. One of the things that often becomes very difficult for people who are in the health science, life science area is really simplifying their message and helping people understand why they need to get behind an investment, because they simply can't understand what the technical components are. So I'm grateful to be here today. Happy to talk about media, branding, simplifying message, and how it can really be an asset when you're trying to raise money.
All right. So we heard now you've heard from the media expert on the panel, but I thought just in order to balance that, we'll have someone who works with that media expert, who is on the investment side of this equation. So Sal, if you can tell the audience what you are and who your company is and how you interact with people like Christine.
Jeffrey, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have both Christine and myself on here. I think this is very important, especially in the life science space. I currently am the CEO of HRN, which is a private multifamily office that has about 8 investments into private direct investments into earlier stage life science companies, notably in the life science, in the oncology and device space. Just this past Monday, we received word that one of our devices received FDA approval and is now marketing. It's an artificial defibrillator that you can power from your iPhone called a Vive. And we profile these companies and work with them. But the story of how we got here is actually kind of interesting, because I started my career at Goldman Sachs doing investment banking, mostly in real estate. And at the age of 29, I raised a chunk of money from a Park Avenue investment manager. And then I did that again later on. And I wound up in Las Vegas doing a lot of distressed work. And then after sort of things changed in the market, a lot of the family were not interested in real estate anymore. And what I noticed is that a lot of these real estate families all had a gateway into life sciences through philanthropy, poorly managed and operated philanthropy. But we were able to actually harness that drive, that emotional drive, to be able to put them into direct private investments, such as the ones that Christine's been working with, one of which we're very proud of, and I don't want to steal her thunder, called Thrive, where we're working with CEOs that have multiple exits under their belt. This one will be the CEO's 8th if he does everything correctly. So we invest in world-class teams, and we are backed by some of the most storied families in the world as it relates to investing into these life science companies. We are actually starting an investment next week into a company. It's the second. It's a roll down started by Dr. James Allison, the 2018 Nobel Prize winner for oncology in 2018. It's a roll down from his earlier company we invested into called Apricity Health. So there's a lot of, I will tell you though, it's very helpful to have this right now, because having someone like Christine on today is actually very important, because you have to have media today and you have to have attention. And we'll get into that in a moment. But the last thing I want to do is call any company Jeff, and say, hey, I got this hot company, we should IPO, and they say, who? You know, like
Right.
that's you know, you don't want that. You know, you don't want that. So, you know, there's a little bit more today. Things have changed as it relates to raising capital, where you have to stay on top of your investors' attention all the time, because I can tell you, nobody likes investing in life science companies. Not a lot of people, because it reminds them of high school chemistry and biology, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy just to be polite sometimes and sit through here. So with Christine's help, we've been able to raise millions of dollars, being able to do this quite easily because of the way that she shapes the story.
And so, just so the audience is clear, is HRN acting as an investment banker, or are they acting on behalf of these family
No, we
offices?
we are principal investment. We are a principal investment firm. We are investment managers for 13 family offices.
Got it. Great. Prashant, if you'll be so kind as to tell the attendees about what you do and what what pearls you can offer in terms of this particular topic. You have pearls on many topics. But
I speak about many things, mostly not relevant. Thanks, Jeff, and for the repeat invite to SoPE webinar. This is always fun to do, and the audience always tends to be terrific. And I really look forward to the questions that come through, because it's a lot of fun engaging this particular room. That being said, to those who have not attended a previous seminar where Charlie or I showed up, I'm Prashant Girinath. Charlie and I run the IP-facing life science side of Greenberg Traurig. We are a global law firm with about 2,700 attorneys around the world, 40 plus offices. If you need an attorney for anything in life, we probably have 5 of them minimum, and anywhere on the planet. So that's, there's massive, and then there's us. But that's not where Charlie and I started this journey, and that's not the most relevant piece of why we are in this room. We're, as I mentioned a second ago, both life science attorneys. We are IP-facing, almost exclusively early and privately held companies in the life sciences, and we are in that relatively small breed of lawyers who are boardroom lawyers who also do substantive things on intellectual property, deal flow, etc. So we work closely with folks such as Sal in helping companies get funded, in putting together investor syndicates, in looking out for and constructing partnering opportunities, as Jeff, we do recently with you. And overall, we try to help guide the company's strategy, keep the company aligned with the mission plan that it has had. And if we do our jobs right, the C-suite works in tandem with the board to keep the messaging online. And in my time in this business, I've seen a dramatic shift in the way we approach the way these companies position themselves external facing. There was a time when I first came into the industry that stealth was what you did. No biotech ever told anybody what they did. In fact, there were some biotechs called stealth biotech. And where did all that go? And that was perfectly fine in an ecosystem where there was a lot of cash. Differentiation was not the most important. You could go all the way into clinic and then make a splash and then have a big crossover in an IPO. The IPO window was massive. Everyone was doing public offerings. That world has changed. It has changed especially dramatically over the last 2-3 years. In fact, a lot of those companies that did do public offerings 3, 4, 5 years ago, you are seeing where a lot of those stocks are right now. Those are there are very difficult conversations going on in those boardrooms. And to come back from all of that kind of really brings us to where Sal positioned the conversation, which is we're in, especially in spaces like oncology, we're in very crowded thickets. There are 7 or 8 shots on goal for each indication, each type of therapy. So you want to have not just a name recognition or a technology recognition about your company and what you do, but also very early focus on the differentiation, why it is that what you do matters, why is it exciting, why is it going to solve big picture problems. Working with folks like Christine that actually have that media savvy helps you get that message out. And if we do our jobs right as lawyers, most lawyers are naysayers. We like to believe we're not. So we like to help you make sure that your message does not get you in trouble, right? You're not going and saying, hey, take this and it's going to cure you while, we're not yet in the clinic. And
right. And
right?
Prashant, I don't want your message to get you in trouble by running too far over. So I'm going to ask Charlie to say hello.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just briefly continue Prashant's message. So we, the proof in what we do, I think, is really in the pudding. So between Prashant and I, we have, patent portfolios covering 3 FDA-approved drugs. Our current clients are in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. We are entrepreneurs as well as legal entrepreneurs. And I think, along with kind of, especially Christine will probably get into this, accuracy in messaging, which I'm summarizing, which Prashant said a little earlier, is very important. One word can make the difference between having happy investors and being investigated by the DOJ in a press release. Also, frequency is important. To Prashant's earlier point, people used to press release everything. Hey, we got a patent, we're going to press release this. Those days are over. And if you do that sort of thing, unless that patent is like the groundbreaking patent that covers all of CRISPR, people are actually going to see that press release and it will drive down the valuation of your company because they will say you look like an amateur and we're concerned about what you're doing. And so not just the frequency of messaging, but the content of the messaging and the accuracy of the messaging is very, very important. And I think Christine's going to have a lot to say about this, and I think we're looking forward to hearing that. And I'm certain that Sal can probably provide a number of examples like where these rules are generally the case and where they worked well and perhaps where they didn't work as well. So Jeff, we really appreciate you having us. Thank you. It's always a pleasure, Arlen, to work with SoPE. We always look forward to these discussions, and we're very excited about kind of the presentation and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. So you have a good number of folks on the call here today that are saying, okay, I'm just starting out. I have this great idea. I have a company. I have a little bit of funding. There are lots of different ways to market to different audiences. Christine, tell us, what do you think that a life science company should look like or a healthcare company should look like? What are the things that work the best? What are the things that work best with certain audiences? And, our audiences are either patients, hospitals, doctors, investors, or potential strategic partners. So where do you think we should start?
Before spending any money, I think the most important thing to do is to have a very simple, clear message about what you do. Because honestly, if you start marketing and your website's a mess, and I say a mess, I mean that it doesn't specifically state what you're doing and help people who may not understand the medical components or be in healthcare, but they might want to be investors. If you start marketing anything that is confusing, you lose the person, whether it doesn't matter which platform you're on, you can lose them within 3 seconds, specifically off of a website. So if you are not clear about your messaging, I wouldn't do anything yet. Because it would be wasted money. And we even see that, for example, at the Super Bowl. Think about how many times we watch the commercials, we're all excited about it. We see this commercial and we're like, what was that? And then you're trying to understand what the commercial was about. And then you go, who was the company behind that? That was wasted money if they are not able to immediately connect their brand to whatever they're advertising or their messaging. So those are good examples of why I believe you've really got to start with the messaging and get that honed in, which shouldn't be very difficult. It really shouldn't. It really comes down to bringing in a consultant, someone like myself or any other company that can really look at it and say, You need more than a pretty website. You need to have people understand what you do. From there, it would be about brand awareness. And then that comes from LinkedIn. That comes in making sure that the bios and your specific statements on your LinkedIn profile, for example, are conducive to what you're doing and what you want to have people understand about your ongoing mission. You want everything to really match on every platform. These days, as Charles mentioned, press releases, are they important? I always say from a media background, unless it's breaking news, unless it's going to uncover a murder or a press conference, press releases are a waste. However, I do believe that there's merit to using them in connection and in addition to other media when you're an early stage company. I say that because think about it in a year or a year and a half down the road when you're trying to raise investment. If you're just starting out, you want them to be able, any potential investor, to Google search you and look and see the documentation or the track record, so to speak, of your company. Having that out there will help it look less like a flash in a pan kind of startup. So you want to have that in addition to meaningful media. And when I say media, we all see those ads on Instagram, Facebook. You probably get emailed all the time. $99 for placement on NBC, ABC, CBS. Well, they say on, you think you're going to be on TV, and what it is a press release. And those types of press releases are not in connection with the Associated Press, like real news press releases. And what that means is, yes, they might go out on a Google search, but they don't even last. They don't even stay on the internet more than 3 months because you get what you pay for. So that's one narrative I could go off on a tangent on because I really don't think it's a very good service of media or PR. It's unfortunate that it actually taints the brand or the niche of public relations because that's anti what I would do in any way, shape, or form. I do believe you mentioned like what do you invest in when you're just starting out, especially when you have something that will have an impact on somebody's life, which in most cases life science does, right? I think video is very, very important. And I work with Sal, and he can talk a little bit more about that on one of the other companies he was raising money for. And what we used is really an understanding of what will touch somebody's heart. Essentially, business and good marketing all comes down to storytelling. And if you can connect or educate or touch somebody's heart with what you do, you can avoid telling them how the car was built. You can help them feel like they're going to be part of driving the car off the lot. It's all about the transformation and helping them understand that they're getting behind a mission. So for example, in that particular video, we were talking about a cancer, a potential, cure for cancer, an investment for any type of research that would go and benefit people who had cancer. So we got survivors of cancer to talk about how meaningful this work is. And they had, that emotion to their own survival. Those are the things that I think are huge assets that should come first before ever really going and saying, hey, I want to get on CNBC. Of course, that's always good, but you want to make sure that you don't blow the opportunity when you finally get it. So hopefully I don't want to go on too long. I don't know the timing on that. Feel free to follow up with questions or go to the other panelists.
No, that's great,
Jeff,
Christine.
Jeff?
You have a question, Arlen?
Yeah, we have a question from the audience. It's just easier for me to read it. As a medical student, how do I research and find the holes in the life science or device industry that needs to be filled? What websites or newsletters should I or can I listen to learn more? Also, I'm a non-traditional med student in my 30s, and we don't learn this stuff in medical school. What's the answer?
For the niches as to where the holes are, I really think that, there is a part of overall media to watch, to watch what's really trending and what, is really taking off as far as life sciences or any healthcare, for example, what is the basic need? But I think it comes down to just really being educated about, overall trends in whatever you're excited about. You don't want to get behind something you don't have a passion for. And if he is not a more of an alternative medical student, and I would need to drill down a little bit more, I would say find something that you're truly passionate about, because it's easy to get behind something that you think might make some money. But if you you don't really have the passion for it, that's not going to be something that you're going to want to continue and provide the most value to. So I would talk about, really look into yourself as to what you use in your daily life, what your family and friends use in their daily life or could use depending on what's happening. But it really comes down to the trends in, cancer or addiction, for example. We see what's happening in the opioid crisis. There are plenty of companies out there that have worked very hard to try to solve those issues, whether it's, fighting fentanyl or any other addiction. Those types of drugs are really, necessary these days, mainly because we see the trends in the society overall. Because of COVID, we've seen the increase in addiction. So I would just really, I'm happy to follow up with that person offline and provide some resources as well without knowing all the details. But my overall thought is if you're an early entrepreneur, always go to what you really are passionate about because you can't fail from there.
No, Christine, that is sage advice from someone who has been there and done that before. You can't always chase fame and or money. You have to go with something that is in your heart and that you really want to see come to fruition. Sal, let me ask you, from all the discussion we've had here about the marketing modalities that Christine has said, what has worked in your experience with the companies that you've supported and that you've invested in?
I like to, the reason why we like working with Christine is that she puts together a story or a narrative that people can sort of put their feet into, if that makes sense. So the video she did for a cancer fund wound up raising millions of dollars for us in these cancer deals because of the story that was immediately the way it was structured, the way it was delivered. And what people didn't really think about was that there's a huge longevity there. Cancer's not going away anywhere anytime soon. So to be able to use that media over and over again with additional investors coming in was a great way to sort of set the table and tell the investors, this is what you could expect. This is the team who we are, and this is what we're for. I agree with Christine. I've been to many life science, and there's one coming next week. And you go on the website and it doesn't say anything. And all it does is if you go on the website, the operator or whoever's put it together, put it in a way where it makes themselves sound very smart in front of their colleagues, but it totally alienates their investors because they have no idea what this means. Nobody really, you have to understand that the audience is going to be much more emotionally involved if you tell it in a story format. And I also think the lawyers might actually agree with that too, because you've seen today a lot of people go out and they make promises, technical promises. We don't make any technical promises at all. We have the CEO tell the story straight from the horse's mouth so that we don't have to worry about the messaging. But it's the grooming of that messaging that's the most important, because then people want to come in and be a part of that story. And that's the success that we've had doing every oncology company or any life science company that we've had since we've been working with Christine for about 3 years now.
Jeff, there's a question that comes up about direct-to-consumer pharma marketing. I mean, not a day goes by that's a hot topic. The other topic recently has been patent extension and various shenanigans to extend the patent life of a drug. So I want to ask the panel, the United States is one of 2 countries in the world that allows pharmaceutical direct-to-patient marketing. The other is New Zealand. It's an enormous expenditure, like billions and billions of dollars, and they wouldn't do it unless there was a significant return on investment. But my question to the panel is that a good idea? That is direct to consumer, not just pharmaceutical marketing, but are we going to see it in medical device? Are we going to see it in prescribed medical therapeutics, et cetera?
We're already seeing it in medical devices. The sleep apnea implant is all over the TV.
So for someone that is considering doing that, and again, I mean, you got to have a lot of money to do this, but for the people that are sort of getting into this thing, what are the legal issues? And Christine, I'm interested in your thoughts about sort of the ethics of this, because people are making the observation that marketing drives up cost and actually doesn't contribute to outcomes.
Yeah, I think that the legal question should be answered maybe first, if that's possible, and then I can talk about the ethics.
All right, so if we're going to switch to the legal, I'll broaden it a little bit because we have another person in the chat that's also asked this. How does marketing your idea jeopardize, or how potentially does marketing your idea jeopardize your intellectual property?
So Jeff, I'll start with this is really like a hybrid question. Part of this has to do with the FDA, the FTC, and the DOJ, and part of it has to do with things that are more legal. I'll start off with kind of the FDA portion of it, and then I'll pass the baton to Prashant.
Can we
first
take
of
the
all-
FTC angle as well? While you're doing one F acronym, you might as well do it.
Okay. So there are different types of advertising. For example, if you have an approved drug that you can do in the US. And the FDA examined this several years ago because people raised, Arlen, the very question that you raised, like, why do we allow marketing directly to consumers? And the answer the FDA came up with is that it's generally on balance better for patients because physicians don't have time to keep up with all of the innovations that are occurring in medicine. And because invariably it gives the patient an option which they can then prompt their physician or healthcare provider about and say, hey, is this right for me? And so it was seen as actually being valuable, and that's why it still exists. As I said, there are different types of advertising. So you'll see some things that just will flash up like Viagra, talk to your doctor, right? And that's just sort of a brand advertising. And then there's the kind of fair and balanced advertising where you see like the Cialis couple holding hands in 2 bathtubs. And while everything looks pleasant, you've got this scrolling list of like side effects. This drug may kill you. It may cause like a permanent erection. It may do this. It may do that. And you have to kind of deal with that, right? And so, the general rule, though, in these kinds of things, assuming that you've gone through the proper approval or clearance processes, and that you are marketing on label for the indications and uses that the agency has approved, is that's fine. You want to stick to that. And if for some reason you are marketing off label, which is a little riskier, then there are a number of cases where the courts have said that as long as your marketing is truthful and non-misleading, it is protected by the First Amendment. It is free speech. And so you can go ahead and market that. There was a case about a fish oil drug, Vasepa, that the holding came down being exactly that. So, first of all, you have to go through the proper FDA channels. You have to make certain that you've gotten your approval or your clearance if it's a medical device. And then you have to focus on your indications that you are approved for. And then if you do decide to market off-label, understanding, for example, that most cancer drugs are used off-label, your off-label marketing has to be truthful and non-misleading. So with that, Prashant, can you step in and talk a little bit about the IP?
Absolutely. So, one thing worth mentioning at the outset when it comes to things like off-label marketing is, not all media presence, not all public presence is the same. There is a lot of distinction between the stuff that emotionally grabs you, as Christine mentioned, and things that are put out as scholarship, trade publications. And building that bridge sometimes is part of your strategy, or should be part of your strategy, because some things like off-label, you can't necessarily go out there and speak about it and endorse it as a company, but nothing prevents you from having wholesome scientific publications inquiring that particular use case with the product that you are putting on the market for ostensibly another purpose. Coming back to the IP question itself and the timing around IP, I think we should pull this back into a use case like the oncology conversation that Sal had started, right? Going back to one of the questions I'm going to try to answer a few things here on how to find white space in a technology area. Let's say you are looking at oncology and you're looking at something like cell therapy. We all know right now cell therapy in solid tumors is a difficult problem to solve. A lot of companies are trying lots of ways around that. You have a brilliant idea. You want to come up with a solution to making cell therapy effective in a very difficult non-immunogenic solid tumor. Well, great. First, file a piece of IP on it. Second, try to see if you have enough proof of principle, at least in vitro studies, maybe in an animal model. Now you have a story. Now you can come and tell that story, because now the story will resonate and you are protected on the IP front. Not all of this happens exactly this way. If you don't have cash to do those experiments, you may wish to go and raise that cash first, in which case, get that piece of IP on file. It's not very expensive, and it gives you some protection to go out and have those conversations.
Thank you, Prashant. So we have some questions for the audience, but I want to kind of go back a step and get your thought processes, Sal and Christine, on a simplification of branding. Again, we're dealing with really complex pharmaceutical, medical devices, artificial intelligence, lots of things happening in our world. What is your thought process in terms of how do you simplify that message so that it can brand you in a way that, Sal, you can go to your family offices and say, these are the people I want to invest in?
It really, in my opinion, it comes back from my journalism hat. If you don't mind, I jump in here, Sal, for a moment and just talk about the summary overall. You want your company to be described in a very palatable way that anybody can understand what you do and what the outcome will be. A lot of the doctors that we've worked with, of course, they're brilliant, you know, yourself included, Jeff. And one thing that I notice is that, you know, we have a hard time understanding the same language that you speak every day. And that's true for anybody in any industry. But it's our job to kind of come at it and say, okay, what do you do and what will the outcome be? And how do we help everybody understand exactly what you do? Donald Miller has a really good example. I've worked with him with StoryBrand. I was one of his students, and he talks about, you know, instead of talking about how a drug is, you know, very important and all that type of stuff, if somebody says to you, what do? You say, well, you know how everybody's scared to go to the dentist and they're terrified? We developed a drug or a device, I'm making this up, you know, that will make you leave and laugh your way out the door. It takes the pain out of the experience. Now you've helped somebody understand that you are giving an outcome to people who are terrified of the dentist, and you're not telling them about, you know, the patents that you have on the drug or what that drug or that device might do, because nobody's going to understand it. As he often says, if you confuse, you lose. And so that would be the one thing that I'd say is the exercise we go through with our client is, you know, what do you do? How are you different? And why should we care? Simple questions.
Mm-hmm.
And once we go from that, you know, 30,000 foot view, then we can drill down. There is always a space and a need for the specifics of the science and the technology, but it shouldn't be on the upper or even the lower fold of your website, because nobody's going to understand what you're doing. So my overall goal is helping people just understand that. I also think that that really helps from a legal standpoint, because when you start getting very technical about stuff, that's when you get in trouble. And so from my days of, you know, doing media training for corporations or, you know, individuals, it's really helping people understand that the more you say, the more you put yourself at risk. So simplifying what you do, helping people understand, and then pointing to the science in documentation or research papers, that's where you give assets to people like Sal or those that are trying to raise money, or even just building your own brand.
Sal, what insights can you bring in? What do you think in terms of the size of the campaign and the length of the campaign?
I'll tell you right now what it is. It has nothing to do with the campaign, but Christine's right. If you really want to be successful in this business, raising money, and I want everybody to listen to this. If you really want to be successful in this business, raising money, you will refine your messaging to the point where someone can relay it to their spouse. And I work with some of the most sophisticated, smartest people in the world, CEOs of, you know, people who I was telling about before, Dr. James Allison. If he can refine it to a way, and he's very smart, where people's spouses and investors can understand it, then he's ahead of the game. And this is the burden for everybody here who's an entrepreneur, is to be able to say what you do in a way that Christine can relay it to someone else where it makes sense. And that is, you will die. I don't care about marketing to channels to, you know, I'm looking at all these questions here, like preparing, you know, going direct with everything. If you don't have a message, nobody's going to take you seriously. I can't tell you how many LinkedIn requests I get for meetings and they're talking about all sorts of things I don't understand. I don't have time for it. I really don't, because it doesn't really hit me. It doesn't really go through, you know, it's just too much burdensome for me. So the first key to being an entrepreneur is to be able to make sure that you can refine your messaging. And that is important today, because not everybody's going to give you money because you're smart or because you have IP. Does that make sense, Jeffrey?
Yes, it does. Good,
Okay.
good thoughts.
Okay.
Arlen, I know we have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we have lots of questions, but I want to get to the one, and maybe Jeff, you can answer this or others. This has to do with, you mentioned at the very beginning, the different customers, and this question has to do with marketing to doctors. So first of all, there's a difference between sales and marketing. And so maybe, Christine, you can sort of elucidate the difference. But the question is, what is the best way, in the words of the questioner, to market to healthcare providers? So Christine, what are your thoughts about that? And Jeff, you're a healthcare provider. I'm a healthcare provider. So what do you think?
Well, I'll let Christine go first and then we can chime in.
Well, I think from my experience, I actually have a startup company that's on ice right now, and it was a automation for EHRs, electronic health record systems. And through the process of building that and getting it as far as I could, I did get a lot of experience within healthcare itself and doctors and marketing to hospitals as well. And the bureaucracy is very, very tough when it comes to systems overall. But when it comes to doctors, I think it's really about the network that you have and the respect that you have overall. Use cases of like Doximity, of course, which if you don't know or aren't familiar, it's like a LinkedIn for doctors, and they have that trust. But doctors, you guys are smart, you know, and you know when you see something that's not legit. And so when you see a bunch of media that's like the press release that I go back to, the $99 press release of featured on ABC, CBS, you guys can sniff that out. So my overall suggestion on, marketing to doctors is being extremely authentic and being very straightforward with what you're after, and using them as resources. Maybe it's that networking component of, if it's a product that you have, identify some of the best doctors or even hospital systems, for example, that could pilot what you have and give you strong testimonials. The one thing that you never want to do is be braggadocious about yourself and your career. You want other people to brag about what you have and what you're bringing to the market. And so that's where video and messaging still come back in. But high-level media has a place here too, depending on the level of the company or the maybe it's a product or a drug. But if you're marketing to doctors, you have to be sincere. You have to be very honest and transforming them in an understanding of what you do. The other thing that I realized as well in this experience is that you may have an orthopedic doctor that has no idea what a bariatric surgeon really needs. You all went to medical school and you have that common knowledge, but the specifics of the different needs of a different niche in medicine, they're unique. And so you have to be able to also talk to other doctors in a way that they will understand exactly how you're making a difference. It all comes down to storytelling. So I say, be authentic. Identify the best use cases that you have, use testimonials, videos from patients or whomever is impacted by whatever product you have, and work with them directly in that way. And then get, people who will be also evangelists of your product, and then use those doctors as, even if you're giving free product, as testimonials in your marketing assets.
So Christine, I'll take that one step further. Yes, storytelling will get you the ear of physicians, but physicians are really hybrid beings. We are basically scientists that have merged with having the capacity to take care of other human beings. And as that hybrid, the thing that really drives each of us is data. So yes, a good story gets us piqued enough interest to say, okay, I'll listen, show me your data. And that's what will change the mind of somebody. If you look at all of the complex immuno-oncology trials that are going on now, and you listen to the societies that talk about these trials, it is really a debate over the data. And when you can convince your fellow physicians that this trial or this drug or this device tried in thousands of people, had the results with minimal side effects, and is potent and safe and pure, then you will gain their trust. Then you will establish key opinion leaders. Then you will get people that are your champions, both in your company, outside of your company, who will sell your product for you.
So Jeff, I'm going to add just a couple of things. First of all, I want to say to the audience that there's been some questions about, is this going to be recorded and where can I find it when it is? Yes, it is being recorded. Yes, it will be uploaded to YouTube, and you should go to SoPE Video, which is our YouTube channel, and that's where you'll find it.
Jeff, I just want to interrupt real quick. I agree with you if you're talking about physicians. I think the purpose of this webinar were people who are looking to raise capital around their ideas. Does that make sense? Because I don't, we're not really professional as it relates to marketing to physicians, because there's their own group of people. But I will tell you one thing. If you go off to a family office leading with data, you'll be thrown out.
You're absolutely
Nobody will take
right.
you seriously, because do you ever remember data? When was the last data point you remember? You remember the Star Wars trilogy. You remember that this guy has 8 unicorns and you want to be involved in his 9th or 8th or something. So I think, if we're bringing it back to where we should be about raising capital and building brands, I think we're going to be able to provide a lot more value here. We're not doctors and we don't market the doctors, and we don't really know anything about marketing the doctors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear you.
I would
Okay,
make
good.
a comment, Sal, that people approach physicians as investors and as high net worth individuals. So
Yes.
part of it is the same conversation.
It is the same conversation, but that is the second date, not the first date, right? If I'm going to send you, Arlen, a spreadsheet, I'll send you a 112-page deck on a company right now. And then you tell me in an hour if you're going to write a check or not. Does that sound like a good use of time or not?
No, I agree with you.
Okay, you want to hear the story first to get you warmed up for the main entree, which is your big glut of data. And I will also tell you today, too, that there are scientists who I have who are investors who don't trust data. I think that there's been a lot of legerdemain and a lot of mistrust over data over the past coronavirus. And so people, when they look at that, they seem to saying, well, that isn't really absolute to me. I need to have some sort of human, and again, getting back to the capital raising and everything, I need to have some certainty, because all risk is human, right? Because it's not the data that's making the company great. It's not the IP that's going to go public. It's the operators behind that. And they're the ones who have to know how to shepherd their data. And the problem with scientists is that they're not operators first, doctors. And that's really what they have to get across their head first, is that what's in it for the other guy, especially if I'm asking them for a check. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So Sal,
Okay.
and I'm going back to one of these questions that I answered before. If a life science entrepreneur is looking at a potential marketing campaign, and you want to have your family offices invest in a company, what does that look like? What does that campaign look like in terms of how much dollars do we have to set aside for it, and how much time, how much repetition? What's the eventual return on that investment, and what is it? How do you set that up?
It's that's something that can go into an entirely different call as it gets into what we call first call to funding. So the time it comes to my desk, it's usually very well vetted and qualified because of the networks I've had over the past 20 years doing private equity, venture capital, and most recently in 6 years, oncological and diagnostics. So it really, when it comes down to, is the strength of the network that's coming in to be able to see these things. Doctors, by and large, do not have large networks. They're very insular. They don't know anyone in finance. They say they do, but they don't. And you know what I'm talking about here. And that is really, I think, one of the hindrances here is the deal flow and the quality that comes to us. Because by the time it comes to us, it's already sort of been baked. And there's also a lot of other investors who have invested into this already, too. So there's a sharing of due diligence, sort of like if there's like a sharing of gossip. Like, what do you think of this company? Well, I didn't think about the swim lane. I didn't think it was really that, important. I don't really like the valuation. Things like that are the conversations that we have before we even get into the data. And then when we get into the data, that's usually like we spend probably in one company, it was a year for us to do due diligence, but that usually is going to take about 3 months for us to get through to the point where we're comfortable bringing it out to the families.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
It's not about the data. It's about the valuation. It's about the captains. It's about the team. It's about the culture. It's Have they done this before, or do they just find some IP that they're looking for a dumb investor to invest into so that they can do the research and discovery to figure out on someone else's dime what that IP is best used for? I've seen every type of healthcare pitch you can think of, but it all comes down to what Christine's talking about, is the ability to relay a story so that you can even ask for that second date where that 115-page pitch deck filled with data to your heart's content.
And in terms of a ballpark figure for what a life science company should put aside for this kind of campaign?
For a campaign or for legal fees?
I'm
do you
not,
mean?
I'm not, legal
Okay.
fees is different. Like, let's just
Okay.
talk about the campaign itself.
I
the
think you need to
marketing.
put together, I think what you need to do is to put together probably about $50,000 just to make sure that you can handle everything you need to be able to build the business, build the brand, but also keep the brand going in a way where you're continuing to tell a story. If you follow my emails, I tell a story on each one of our companies. And we had a story
You
today.
do.
Yeah, and what it is, and you're invited into the story. Jeff, you missed investing with my ex-boss at Goldman Sachs on this one, but later on, you can come in. That's a story now that it's in your head, and then you'll think about the data second. You'll be like, oh yeah, I'll get to the data second. Nobody's going to remember the data. But the way we use Christine today, and we have a lot of CEOs who have a lot of, they're very pedigreed, they know what they're doing, but they have a hard time putting the messaging together because they're sitting into sort of like a feedback loop where all they hear are themselves and the same words and everything. And we've been able to break that out because the investors are never, and I mean this in most due respect, your investors are never going to be as smart as you are about your product, but you have to instill them the confidence that you know what you're doing as a leader. Does that
That's
make
true.
sense? They're not going to be going into the data the way you do. They're going to be like, Sal, you've never proved me wrong. You and Bill with his 3 Ivy League degrees, and Albert who managed $6 billion for the Rockefellers. Why would, you've never had any losses yet in any of this stuff through an extreme environment. Obviously you're doing something right. And you want to be able to show that consistency to your investors, whether it's your company's a founder or not, by making sure you have lots of media hitting all the time, lots of good news coming out. And that's what Christine does. She puts them on the cover of all these great important magazines, Forbes, everything, myself included. But that builds up that, if you think about it, elevates the status not of you, but of your investors. So now my investors see me on the corner of Madison Avenue talking about real estate prices falling. That adds a tremendous amount of credibility. And that's what we want to see with our CEOs, because today, attention is the most expensive thing to get. Anybody can put up a YouTube page, but that doesn't mean anyone's going to watch it, right? You have
Correct.
to pay for that media, and people are actually paying more for media today in that attention than they are for oil, if you think about it. And I can draw out a whole diagram on it, but attention's the new oil, and that's how a lot of wealth is going to be made today.
All right. So speaking about attention, not only do we want to get investors' attention, but companies like the one that I am the chairman of, Biofactura, want to get the attention of strategic partners. So Prashant
What does
and
a
Charlie.
strategic partner mean?
So a big pharmaceutical company that's going to help me co-develop my drug from its early stages to the point where it can be commercialized and they distribute it.
Got it.
So Charlie, Prashant, tell us, does marketing like this work for strategic partners? And are there times where we shouldn't or cannot do this kind of marketing? Like if you have a non-binding term sheet signed or you're in a pre-IPO blackout? Could you educate us a bit?
I'll take the first bit and I'll let Charlie take the second bit, Jeff.
Okay.
As a rule of thumb, yes, absolutely. I can't tell you the number of times I'm in JPM with pharma, BD folks, or C-suite, where they come and say, hey, you know what? That tech was fantastic. How come I never heard of them? Thank you for putting them in front of me. What does that mean? That means people doing their Q4 homework, putting the list of companies they want to meet with, looking at the folks they want to partner with. You did not show up on that list. Why did that happen? Because you're not out there, because people don't know about you. So it is very important to get that message in. To be relevant is to be known, is to be seen. Obviously taking the totality of the messaging here, right? Like to be sophisticated, to be appropriate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously for this audience, data will be important at the right time, but visibility is a prerequisite to move in the right direction there. And that's where I think, to your first question, it's a resounding yes. Charlie, to you for the second bit.
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Jeff. I think, Jeff, and I would use you as an example, right? So I'm going to shamelessly use you as an example here.
Okay.
But I think you need both. Originally, as kind of Christine and Sal were saying, like you have to have a story that gets people's attention, the equivalent of a 30-second elevator pitch. But then you also need the ability, especially if you're in the C-suite, to, once someone is engaged, to credibly fly spec down to whatever degree of detail they want in whatever area they want to talk about, whether that's a clinical trial result, whether that's a rodent model outcome, whether that's an IP issue. And it's this ability to kind of seamlessly flow from, okay, here we are at 30,000 feet, and now we're right down in the weeds, and then we can pop back up and do it again. And Jeff, you're very, very good with that. And I think that shows. The other thing I would say is it also helps, Prashant and I, for example, have connections with a number of VCs, a number of big pharmas, a number of investment funds. And so warm introductions are also helpful. If you've got a good story with a warm introduction is better than a good story on its own. Those would be kind of the 2 points I would add to what Prashant's saying.
And
All
if
right. Go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to add here also the power of consistent connection with that potential influencer. So for example, an email list, always adding value and using it as a way to continue that connection with that particular partner. So say, for example, you have this big email list of ideal influencers that you might have, or partners in the future. Consistently showing them, what you're doing, or testimonials or media or anything, maybe once a week at an email drip would be very valuable. Something that I do to continuously start the connection or keep the connection going. Many times I have had potential clients come to me and they say, well, I want to do this, but our budget isn't there. I don't see that as a loss. I try to continue to keep them on my email list and now start putting out content every week or every other week to help them understand how to improve their business. I might not hear from that person for another 2 years, but they're going to remember me because I'm providing that content. I say to you or anybody else looking for strategic partners or influencers in the future is, even if they're not immediately responding to an email drip or anything like that, they're still in the back, you're still in the back of their mind. And as you use that to build out your own brand, you're doing that publicly through that, and they may come back to you, or they'll now know. It's very different than if, you talk to somebody last year and you're like, they come to you and they say, oh, you're not ready yet. And then you go to them next year and you say, oh, can we have a meeting? If they had been on your email list and seen and documented kind of in their mind what you've been doing as you've grown your business, they're going to be much more receptive to that second meeting because they've known what you're doing as you're trying to grow your business. In fact, something that I would love to, offer anybody on this call, if they'd like to continue to, get education from me or from Sal, I'm sure, if they want to join my email list, I'd love to continue doing that. I'm doing a free training tomorrow on how ChatGPT and AI can reduce your cost and produce better productivity for your overall company at all stages.
Great. Yeah, and I'm sure people will take advantage of that. I'll give a plug for the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs as we're winding up the hour. I hope that you have enjoyed this interaction and educational webinar. Please join the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. We have over 33,000 LinkedIn members worldwide. It only costs $80 a year to join. We've kept it very reasonable so that it shouldn't be a burden for you, and you should look at it as a place that you can both learn, network, and grow your business. In terms of wrapping up, Christine and Sal, I'll put this to you first. Not every scientist, not every physician, not every entrepreneur is a good storyteller and a good data-driven explainer. Who is it that you say, you have a great product, but I can't put you on TV, or I can't put you on radio, or I can't put you in front of 1,000 people? How do you tell them that? How do you coach them through that? And give us some examples of great results from a marketing campaign, and give us examples of awful failures from a marketing campaign.
Well, as far as a marketing campaign, it depends on how you look at it and how many layers you have that deep. But I can tell you that I have had a lot of experience in working with CEOs, doctors, lawyers, whomever, who really speak a different language in many ways. And so putting them on TV, I help them understand you will waste your time and your money if you don't work with me before and we do this practice round of your messaging. Anybody can learn how, especially somebody who's quite intelligent, they can learn good sound bites. They just need somebody from the outside to help them. And forgive me say this, but dumb it down. And it's essentially what we did in the media all the time. It's sad, but you have to make it even more and more palatable for a younger and younger generation, and maybe lack of education. So it's no different. And that's what we have to do, is help them understand that, number one, there's liability in what you say. That's the biggest thing, especially when we're talking about FTC or FDA kind of concerns. Number two, you want to be able to have a repeat visit on whatever it might be. You want the writer or producer to say, hey, that guy was good, I want him back. That's when I do a good job. And Jeff, I know you used the media as well as you built your own practice, and you became such an expert in your field and continue to do so. So the value of this, but it's about being a good soundbite. It's about, giving good content and being available, and anybody can learn that. Anybody can. They just have to understand that if you want results, you've got to be able to do this media training. And it's not that hard. You just need somebody like me or somebody else, for that matter, to just help you understand what you're not saying or what you're not translating. I also work with a show called The Wellness Hour. And I currently have a show that I'm launching called The Legal Hour. It's a 30-minute program interviewing doctors. The Wellness Hour was, and the Legal Hour is more about that for lawyers. These are two areas where people really struggle to help, people understand what they do. They want to talk about all the specifics of, the dental decay and all these things. That's like, nobody wants to hear that. I don't want to hear about gum disease. I want to hear about it in a much more palatable way. Otherwise, I'm going to click. I don't want that. If you tell me that bleeding gums actually makes me more susceptible to COVID or any other disease for that matter, you're getting anybody's attention because everybody was worried about COVID. And that's actually true. So that was where we came in. Like, how do we find a story to put a dentist on TV for earned media? That's not easy. But when you relate it to in a simple way of things that somebody might really have going on, all these things, that makes it a connection. So to answer your question in a long way, I apologize. The biggest mistake is people thinking they can't do it. They can. They just need to know how to say things in a structured way.
Right. Just training like anything else. Sal, successes and failures? No, you're on mute.
I think I'll tell you that there are some horror stories from my investment banking days during the late 90s when you had a lot of nerds who didn't have a personality and they didn't know how to dress trying to sit in front of large institutional investors. And that didn't go well. And that really brought in at that point the need for a third-party advocacy group for the nerds. And I mean that in the most benign way as possible. But you got to think about it like going to the gym. Communication is probably the most important skill set you can have, especially if you're an entrepreneur. I don't care if you're a doctor, you should always be learning more skills, right? And that's the point with communication. If you're a better communicator, it helps with your relationships, it helps with your marriage, it helps with just about everything you can think of, especially when it comes to raising capital. I will say that, on the record, we have only worked with CEOs who've gone through Christine first, because if they don't want to work with Christine, it's going to be problematic for me. It's almost going to be, it's too difficult for me to get going with it. And I'm not saying that you need to work with Christine in order to get a check from us. Many of you guys are a little too early stage at that point for us to be involved. However, you have to make sure that you have the consistency of something you're not going to be doing every day. For most people, that's working out. For life science CEOs and doctors, that is not communicating convincingly or clearly over a consistent period of time. I will say that on Thursday, if anyone sends me an email, because I see a lot of things here like earlier stage stuff, and we're having a special webinar at 7 p.m. Eastern And if you email me at sal@hrn.llc, I'll send you the invite. sal@hrn.llc, not .com.llc. If it bounces back, you did it wrong. And we're going to go over all the mechanics and everything of how we set that up with my two partners. But for the purpose of this call and everything, as it relates to marketing, you're in a world today where we're in a very conspicuous society where you need to make sure you are buttoned down correctly, because people are going to look at you and judge you, especially CEOs like me and investors. They're going to be like, does this guy really take the time to learn the skill to ask me for $2 million for his first startup? And that's really what it's going to come down to. Does this person really have the gravitas? And if you don't have the gravitas, then you don't have any leverage. And if you don't have any media, you're never going to get any leverage. And that's really the way I look at the world. But I think you need to start, and this is so important. I'm so happy that you have both of us on here, is that you need to continue to make a message in the first place that's simple, that somebody can explain to their spouse, and then repeat it over and over again with stories and testimonies and all sorts of stuff like that. Because that really is how you have to understand. Doctors have become very transactional today, but when you're raising money, that's very relational. Okay,
Yes.
It's very relational. It's not
Totally.
like, hey, here's my pitch book, write a check for $1 million. No, there's a lot of whining and dining and everything down here. And Christine's right, because people will see certain things happen. We have one investor who's been watching my shoulder for the past 7 months, and now he's putting $1 million into one of our companies called Thrive. I'm ecstatic about it, but that's the consistency that took it there. If I wasn't communicating, building a relationship, why would he want to write a check? You got to think about it in relationship terms.
That's very true. So I'll ask all the panelists, if people want to get in contact with you, if you'll put a way for them to contact you in the chat room, an email, a LinkedIn. We've had a lot of requests, and I think that would be great to be able to answer their questions and further the conversation.
Sure.
So as just go to the chat room and then it'll go to everyone who's on the call.
Yeah, unfortunately, the chat is not distributed to the audience. It's only available to the panelists.
So is the Q&A?
Yeah, and the Q&A is limited to the audience. So the best thing to do, I think, is maybe you can give your email address and then you can somehow forward the participant information, if that's okay, or how would you like to do that?
I'm happy to do that. It's J Hausfeld, J as the letter J, H-A-U-S like in Sam, F like in Frank, E-L-D as in David, at biofactura, BIOFACTURA.com. For wrapping up, Prashant and Charlie, I'll do in that order. Pearls or warnings to the attendees here in terms of what not to do so we don't get in trouble when we want to use a marketing campaign.
All sound, all bark and no bite results in Elizabeth Holmes. So make sure you have substance behind everything you're doing. Don't just have a story, back up the story with real data and real facts at the right time.
Yep.
And it's very easy to get lost down that rabbit hole.
Well, you also have to have, right. You also have to have a moral compass to help you stay on course.
Absolutely. We raise hundreds of millions for companies year in, year out. We sell companies for billions. We've done this for the last decade and a half. Ultimately, it all comes down to, can you stand the scrutiny? Because you've gone through a deep and long process, as Sal has explained and as Christine has explained, to build trust, to build resonance. When time comes, you got to show up with the data, you got to show up with the goods, and you got to deliver. Otherwise, you have no credibility. And then it doesn't matter how well you position whatever you do, you got nowhere to go.
Charles?
I think just adding to what Prashant says, always a good idea to run things by your lawyer before you turn them loose on the world. Because once you release them, once the barn door is open, it's very hard to close it. The other thing is, I would say, words matter. So, be truthful, but in being truthful, make certain that the words reflect your truth. you know, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just leave it at those two things. But if I have to give one pearl, before you put it out there, run it by your lawyer.
Good advice. Arlen, anything to wrap up with?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a great session. I want to thank everybody for participating. Obviously, we have a lot more to talk about, and if you want to learn more, join us at the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs.
Thanks for all those who are panelists today. Thanks for all those who attended today. We appreciate your support always, and go out there and make these things come to life. Be well. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Take care.